This is who we are.
This is who we are. WADR.
Citizens R is evolving as the WADR's partnership with NET continues. This April, your NET Democracy and Governance program is going to the Sahel. We will focus on Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and other West African countries, including Benin, Togo, Nigeria, and the Gambia. Bolder conversations, real voices, inclusive discussions. Let's talk democracy. Let's talk governance. Let's talk your truth. Citizens R Season 2 in partnership with the National Endowment for Democracy NET on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM, Dakar.
Hello and welcome to Citizens Hour, supported by the National Endowment for Democracy NET on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting at 94.9 FM in Dakar, Senegal. I am Veronique Njai. We are also streaming on Facebook at WADR English and YouTube at WADR News. Now, across West Africa and the Sahel, millions of citizens continue to struggle with access to basic social services, from healthcare, education to electricity, clean water, employment opportunities, and security. In many countries, citizens are increasingly questioning whether democratic governance has translated into meaningful improvements in their daily lives. At the same time, in many countries, citizens are asking questions regarding insecurity, economic hardships, unemployment, displacement, and rising cost of living as they continue to place enormous pressure on governments and institutions across the region. So today we ask the question: can democracy truly survive where basic social services continue to fail citizens? And what happens when public trust in institutions begins to weaken? Remember that you can interact with us via our social media handles at WADR English and send us a message on +221 7818454421. As mentioned today, we ask the question: can democracy truly survive where basic social services continue to fail? To unpack this, I am joined by two distinguished guests: Mamadou Goita, Executive Director of the Institute for Research and Promotion of Alternatives for Development. Good morning, Mr. Goita. Good morning, Mr. Goita. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you for joining us on the program this morning.
It's a pleasure for me to be on this call.
All right, thank you. And I also have Nadine Umtoni Rugwe, Team Leader and Advisor on Governance and Peace Building for UNDP West and Central Africa. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me and to be here. I'm happy to be here with your listeners. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, in Benin, access to basic social services remains a major concern for many citizens despite years of reform and social intervention programs introduced by authorities in Porto Novo. Government initiatives such as free healthcare measures, school feeding programs in public primary schools, and schemes for low-income households are aimed at improving living conditions and strengthening human capital. However, civil society groups say major gaps still remain in ensuring equal access to essential services for all citizens. Here is a report by Pulsheri Bemeno from Radio Weke, one of our partner radio stations in Porto Novo, voiced by Atiewimbila.
Parliamentary correspondent Mashiala Goliagbo says that despite efforts by authorities, Many vulnerable communities in Benin still face difficulties accessing quality healthcare, education, and other essential social services.
The strategy, National Service Protection Strategies for 2024 to 2028 have been adopted, with a focus on improving incomes, access to social services, crisis resilience, and coordination of social protection system. Despite this progress, a large portion of the population remains inadequately covered, particularly in terms of health insurance and social security, and most workers in the informal sector are still poorly protected.
Civil society groups argue that improving access to basic social services is essential not only for improving living conditions, but also for strengthening democracy and restoring public confidence in state institutions. Jijoho Eugene Agwemon, president of the Network of Civil Society Organizations for the Promotion of Social and Financial Education in Benin, notes that authorities must intensify efforts to make social services more accessible and inclusive.
Basic social services, including healthcare, education, environmental protection, sanitation, clean water, and security, form the foundation of democracy and ensure equal opportunities and the meaningful exercise of citizenship. After all, an individual marginalized by poverty or illness cannot fully participate in democratic life. Hence, the importance of basic social services in supporting the success of democracy.
Political leaders also continue to stress the importance of improving social services as part of efforts to consolidate democracy and improve national development. Politician Ibrahim Baba Agba says access to basic services remains at the heart of democratic governance.
The first thing I need to do is listen to my constituents. And while launching a transparent citizen audit of social services, since I can't improve what I don't measure with my constituents, I have to listen to them. There's a whole issue here, but knowing what's most important is part of this process. I say we absolutely must listen to them and figure out what needs to be done. We have to tackle things step by step. For me, what is most important? Providing drinking water to the people. Water is the source of life. I must ensure that in every district, residents have access to drinking water. Water is life. After water, I believe I must make an effort to combat insecurity while providing electricity. Electricity in this sense to promote the expansion of the power grid. It is the government that provides the medicines. It is the government that appoints the staff and the doctors. But I will make sure to keep an eye on this so that in every district, when citizens fall ill, they have doctors on site to care for them.
Meanwhile, many citizens continue to urge the government to strengthen social infrastructure and ensure that access to healthcare, education, and other essential services.
All right, that was a report in Benin. Obviously, the questions regarding access to basic social services is a strong one across the continent. I'll start with you, Mr. Goita. How important is access to social services in strengthening democratic governance and public trust?
Thank you very much for this opening question. This is something that is very important, and particularly in the context that we are living actually in the Sahel countries particularly. Having said that, if you look at all the different segments of social services, they are very, very critical in the resilience of the population. So you cannot talk about development. We were talking about the social services that are basic things that population should have just to consolidate not only the way of choosing the leaders, but also the way they can be more involved in the political struggles and the political trajectory of their own country. The simple thing is that if you talk about water and sanitation, for instance, so this is something that is very instrumental in creating, confidence between the population and those who are supposed to lead them toward a well-being of the community. There are simple things, to say so, but they are very instrumental in creating conditions for people to get involved in the political trajectory of their own of the country. So you look at also the issue of education. we are all talking about, collapsing, and we'll probably discuss about that today. One of the things that sort of civic education is also collapsing is because access to education has become something that is very complicated for the big majority of the population, actually. So having access to not only information, to knowledge, and to create their own trajectory as young people and then youth and as population is becoming very critical. So there is a strong link between social services and the democratic trajectory of a country, because this is determining the kind of resilience that people can have, the kind of wealth they can create, because creating wealth and redistributing this wealth depends on the way that the population is taking care of his health, taking care of his access to water and sanitation, taking care of education of people, but also taking care about justice, because we are not adding this very important segment to the social services. We cannot separate, the basic social services and justice, because in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of this resilience that I'm talking about. So this linkage, this correlation is very strong in terms of having social services to create conditions for the democratic trajectory of a country. And then I'm not talking about the country as a whole, but it starts at the municipalities level. How the local governance is managed online with social services is very instrumental in measuring, the progress that a given community, a given territory is making, and then going to the national, before going to the national level, and then beyond that to the regional level.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Goita. Nadine, we heard from Mr. Goita, and he spoke about the link. Obviously, there have been years of reforms, years of advocacy regarding ensuring that citizens have access to basic social services. But why do many citizens across the region still feel excluded from the benefits of development despite all these?
Thank you very much. Indeed, there is a high rate of insatisfaction on the side of the citizen, not only because they don't believe in themselves or in the potential of the country, but they know that West Africa and the Sahel is natural resource rich, but not prosperity rich, which is very important to consider. So they see around them the prosperity in terms of a number of natural resources, being land, being the geographic location of those countries, being the potential in agriculture, industry, and others. But all those potential do not translate into development potential. I just want to give an anecdote. On one of our outreach activities, we visited a community, and some of the leaders asked the people, do you really want to vote for this person? Do you still believe in the political processes as they evolve? And the citizen looked at him and said, I really don't care a lot about when the elections will take place, who we are voting for. I care a lot about who will take care of me, who will take care of my children as they desire to go to school, access to energy, as they have hopes for employment and prosperity. So the lack of trust and the breach, I would say, of the social contract is based on the fact that a number of citizens across the region feel that the governance systems which exist do not work for them. They do not give them the access to how they need. They do not give them access to water. And we are in a region where there is quite a wide diversity when it comes to access to energy, for example, as one of the key development indicators. We have countries where access to energy as of today in the Sahel is still at 12%. We also have countries which have reached 88%. So all those disparities and people looking around, they wonder, why is this happening? Why are we not benefiting from all the natural, economic, and I would say the social potential which our countries are having? So where governance can really deliver for its people, people will feel that democracy is also serving them, but they cannot believe in a democracy which is not delivering. Thank you.
Nadi, you did say that it does not translate, even though we have democracy, it does not really translate into what citizens want. So what is the problem? Would you say it is a problem of leaders prioritizing the needs of their citizens?
I would say, when we are in a region like the Sahel, we hear a lot about conflict and insecurity. We hear a lot about the impact of climate change. but we don't reflect a lot about what kind of systems do we have, and I'm talking about governance systems, to deliver for the people. So there are different dimensions we can consider. One is the social contract. When people elect and they vote people into power, they have expectations. The expectations are really based on their personal needs, on their community needs, and the national need they have, and the priorities are set. So when there is a clear mismatch between the priorities of the people and the priorities of the leaders, there is a breach in social contrast, in the social contract. They no longer believe in the leaders they see around them, but they also voted for. So what is the problem? The problem, one, is what kind of vision do we have and definition for leadership in the context of the region? Do people access into power for them to be more powerful, for them to serve? So one of the most important things before we even talk about service delivery is what is the sense of service? How is it prevailing among the leaders in the region? Do they really aspire to serve? And service has different requirements. One, the leaders have to know who they're serving. Do they really have insights and adequate information about the people, where they live? Do they have enough information about their aspirations and the potential they can leverage on? Do they also have enough consideration of the risk and opportunities around them? So the sense of service, I think, for me, is very foundational for the leadership. Number two is also the level of accountability. We need to consider that it's not that everything is not working well. A lot of things are working. And that's why we're even here talking about it, because we have the means, the resources, and the space. But most of the time, accountability is very weak. The citizen and the leaders do not get to communicate and exchange. The mechanisms for accountability and for transparency are not strengthened enough for the people to see what is happening and maybe to adhere to the visions which are being laid out by the leaders. And the last point I also wanted to make is, when leaders are making decisions, are they taking into consideration the voice of the people? Did they take time to listen to them? Did they take time to consider what they voice and what is their contribution in shaping the priorities? So in sum, I would say one is the sense of service. And the second point is really making sure that whatever decision is being made is made for the people and enhancing the channels of accountability and transparency.
All right, Nadia asked the question, are leaders taking into account the voice of the people? Such a question. But then, several years after the Gambia's democratic transition, many citizens continue to face economic hardship, unemployment, and rising cost of living, with some young people still taking the dangerous risks to search for greater opportunities in Europe as daily struggles persist. Questions are increasingly being raised about whether democratic governance has translated into meaningful socio-economic improvements for ordinary Gambians. Our correspondent in the Gambia, Sang Donald Mendy, filed this report.
Nearly a decade after the Gambia's political transition, many citizens say democratic freedoms have significantly expanded. People now speak more openly.
Talking with the peace, security, and stability of this country, we are ready for them. We never succumb, and we are ready to put our lives for the land, to die for Gambia.
Independent media enjoys greater space.
Media has taken advantage of the opportunities provided by the political change we've got since 2017 or 2016.
And political debate is no longer carried out in whispers as it once was under authoritarian rule.
Corruption has become a religion in this country. Corruption has become everyday life for public servants in this country. Corruption has become bread and butter for public officials.
But while many acknowledge progress in civil liberties, economic hardship is emerging as a growing concern for ordinary Gambians. Across markets, transport hubs, and communities, citizens say the rising cost of living is making daily survival increasingly difficult. The prices of basic commodities such as rice, cooking oil, and electricity continue to rise, while inflation and currency prices are heavy strain on low-income households.
We are here at the market, seeing both the highs and lows. Some might say that exported goods are costly because of transportation and other factors, but the things we grow here locally shouldn't be expensive. What I can say is that we need the government to step in and help.
Times you buy your commodities and start selling, and before you realize it, they tell you the prices has increased. It is always difficult to explain this to the customers. It is never easy to sell something today and by tomorrow you have to raise the price.
For many young people, worsening economic hardship and limited job opportunities are fueling frustration about the future. As the cost of living continues to rise, some increasingly view migration as their only chance for a better life, despite the risks involved. As a result, the dangerous irregular migration route to Europe, known locally as the back way, continues to claim lives and leave many families in uncertainty. Across the country, families are still searching for relatives who disappeared during the journey, while others continue to mourn loved ones who never made it home. Among them is Maria Majane, whose brother Falalo left the Gambia nearly 3 years ago.
We hope since they are not confirmed deaths, there must be a hope. Secondly, also, they can be gone without any notification of anywhere. So we believe there is hope. Yeah, because even my mom, if you tell them they are gone, he said if there are people who can stay for ages, decades, and their family had found them just suddenly, so why not him? So we still have that hope that they might be somewhere captured or in anywhere around.
Despite increased awareness campaigns and repeated reports of deadly sea crossings, many young Africans continue to risk dangerous migration routes in pursuit of economic opportunities overseas.
To be rich in this country or to have something to show for, you need to work with NGO or government parastatals.
On the government side, they have failed woefully because creating the enabling environment for young people to thrive in this country is something that is the core mandate of the government.
Many Gambians feel excluded from opportunities, especially youths. Now the job being created are either not sustainable as well.
According to migration monitoring figures, in 2025 alone, at least 893 Gambian migrants were confirmed dead, including 840 at sea and 53 on land, while dozens of boats reportedly disappeared without a trace. Although many Gambians acknowledged improvements in freedom of expression and political participation since the end of authoritarian rule, some argue that those democratic gains have yet to translate into meaningful economic progress. Human rights defender Madi Jobate says democracy must not only guarantee freedoms but also respond to everyday realities faced by citizens.
Men and women die in the Sahara Desert or in the Atlantic Ocean or the Mediterranean is as a result of the fact that public institutions and officials are not performing their functions as required by the law. So law enforcement is not merely protecting rights, preventing the violation of rights, but rights are also about goods and services.
Meanwhile, many Gambians say that while political freedoms have improved since the end of Jammeh's rule, daily economic struggles continue to overshadow those gains. As pressure on households grows and more young people look abroad for opportunities, questions are increasingly being raised about whether democratic progress can be sustained without meaningful economic change.
All right, that was a report from the Gambia by our correspondent, Sang Donald Mendy. Mr. Goita, I will bring you in now. How does, because we've seen that in the case of the Gambia, one major issue that the country is faced with is youth migration, that is the irregular migration known locally as the back way. How does continued youth migration, or what does it tell us about governance gaps in the region, opportunity gaps?
Yeah, I think that the case that I was just smiling because what is being said for Gambia is exactly what's also happening in my country and elsewhere. Young people are moving because they don't have opportunities. Why? Because, we are just limiting our governance on the elections, but also sometimes the freedom of speech when we have some rooms of saying things that we want people to hear. But I think that Nadine Rugbe say it. The issue of accountability is no longer questioned in many cases. It's not accountability about just, you have been deciding on something that you are not performing. It's not that. But the practical side, how the resources are managed in these countries, how people are caring about creating wealth for investment. You look at just a simple thing. You look at the budget of many of these countries. You will see that the budget is just taking care of civil servants instead of investing in the country. And if there is any budget for investment in infrastructure, corruption is coming on board. They are taking everything away. So young people don't have not only access to the job that are supposed to be created by the actions that are the collective resources that have been mobilized, they don't have access to that. But those who are supposed to be also relying on line of their interest are also completely misled to other people who are not, supposed to be accessing to this. So visa is a range of things. If you look at the root causes of migration, and I work a lot on this issue, you will find that where there is a collapse of governance of resources and the collapse of the incoherences between policies that we have and the incoherences between institutions. I'm talking about the labor ministries, the Minister of Finance, the ministries of the country, Minister of Foreign Affairs, in charge of diaspora and the like. There is so much incoherency between these ministries that there is no way to have a vision around how young people need to have conditions in their own country so that they can stay. Because one of the root cause of migration is the lack of opportunity for young people. This is why they are leaving. Most of them, if you look at even the trajectory of migration in our countries, these are regions where people had access to agricultural activities, or they were mining, or sometimes fishing areas where people were just having their living. And that has been completely dismantled by some policies, by investment that are done by foreigners, foreign companies, and so on and so forth, that have been creating also more poverty in the region where resources are. So young people don't have no more this traditional opportunity that they had, and the new ones are completely out of their hands. So this is why they are going. So if you look at that too, there is another key point that we need to look at. This is how we are discussing, the way that the social services are handled, because they became a political arena for the head of states, just to create conditions. So you have a Minister of Energy, you have a Minister of Education. At the same time, you have high commissions that are set up to care about the same thing that are being done. So finally, the budgets are oriented towards something that is not the right institution to take care of that. So young people seeing that, some people are just becoming rich again, but themselves, they don't have even the minimum to access to this opportunity, so they move. So this is one of the root causes of what we call actually youth migration, going to the Sahara and then dying either by in the sea, but also dying in the hands of some armed groups. In the case of Sahel countries, actually, what is happening. So it's a very dramatic issue that we are considering a democratic process linked to elections and linked also to this minor space of freedom of speech. So we can set it, but it's not changing. This means that the issue of controlling the process itself is missing. Who can say that the budget that the government is presenting actually is not for development, is for caring about a minority of the population, that is those who are already civil servants, paying their salaries and taking care of them, buying some infrastructure for them, but it's not for really taking care of this big majority of the population that are young people, but also rural areas where people need to invest in agriculture, in fishing, in cattle, and so on and so forth, just to create conditions for young people to move forward and to develop this kind of segment that we have. So it's how are we looking at the holistic way of governance and then creating these conditions for people not to talk about it, but to do it. And this is the problem. And the parliament, it's like the institutions are here to just join their effort to fool people. This is the case, because those who are supposed to control are also part of the problem in most of the cases. So how can we move on that? Young people don't have any choice just to move, because they need also to live, to survive first, and then to live later on, because they need to create also their own families. So the way they will go, I need to talk to many young people on the way, be it in Niger, but also at the borders. But I've been traveling abroad in the diaspora, discussing with some of the young people who have been here, leaving their countries to go from different countries in Africa. The speech are the same. We didn't find any opportunity for us to move forward. But we can see that in most of these countries, there is economic growth. We are talking about African countries being the highest, sometimes, economic growth in terms of percentage. But how are we using it just to create conditions for these young people? Accessing to social services, to be resilient, and then creating conditions also for job creation so that they can just find their own way in contributing to the development of their own country instead of going to other continent where they have to look for their talents and then to create conditions for themselves to be part of a new society that they are involved in, with all the racism and xenophobia that we can see. Actually, it's not by pleasure that they go, because they are completely lost in this area of bad governance, and then the way that and sometimes no governance at all, because we don't care about the resources, we don't care about the relationship between the social services and the resilience of people in the.
Nadine, you also heard the reports in the Gambia. Corruption is cited as a major challenge, and also migration of the young people in the country. Where does this leave the region when most of its youthful population are trying to leave because they feel they do not have access to opportunities?
You know, for those of us who believe that the youth is the present and the future, I would say, of West Africa and the Sahel, whenever we see these young people who form around 65 to 75% of the population leaving their countries or leaving their region, we also need to realize that we are losing part of our present and part of our future. And when we see these young people leaving, we also need to question why they are leaving. In most cases, 93% of them refer to economic reasons as the main justification for them leaving their countries. 64% talk about insufficient income, which means lack of opportunities in terms of employment and entrepreneurship. And then we have 34 talking about unemployment. But we also have 21% of them talking about the impact of climate change. So now in the case of the Gambia, for example, the opportunities which they had in terms of geography and proximity to the sea is now being translated into a challenge where youth migration, which is also means we are seeing the opportunities and the potential of the Gambia going out of the country. And this is not only happening in the Gambia, because it's also happening across a number of countries in the Sahel. If those are the reasons, what have been the efforts to create opportunities for these young people? And if we have to kind of do an analysis of the rate of people, young people living, why are they living? They're not living because it's their primary aspiration. They're living because of survival. They're living because of the reason I mentioned before. They're living because they aspire to get greater opportunities in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of employment, and etc. If we want them to stay, I think it's important for countries to build ecosystem which provide for those basic services that we were talking about. But for the Sahel and West Africa, it's also important to mention that they don't only need those economic and social benefits they want to access to. It's also important to create a safe environment for them. And safety can mean a lot of things. Safety can mean in terms of security, the absence of war and conflict. But safety can also be about a space where young women and young men are treated with due respect of their rights, when they are heard and when they are respected. So that is also another component which is very essential. We see particularly among young women leaving the continent or the region because they are not seeing that they're not benefiting from a safe space for them. Then if I have to kind of refine, think a bit about corruption. Indeed, corruption is happening. And when and how is corruption happening? Corruption is happening in most cases where people don't have access to basic service delivery, and they are forced to pay a price for a service which was supposed to be free, but now they're paying for it to get access. For example, if a parent wants to access school and the kid is not getting registered, This is a primary need, and the parents will be ready to invest whatever it takes. Unfortunately so, for the kids to go to school. So these are some of the main drivers of corruption. So whenever we break all the barriers towards access to service delivery, we are also automatically reducing the rate of corruption, as we've been seeing in a number of countries. And we have seen the injection of modern technology when it comes to access to service delivery, also being an accelerator to service delivery, but also a means of reducing the rate of corruption. But the question remains, how are we going to build integrity amongst the leadership, but also the public servants and whoever is to provide services? Thank you.
All right, thank you. From that report in the Gambia, we could highlight that access to basic social services has been a major foil to why young people are leaving the country. But now we head to Nigeria, and for many people in the country, access to basic social services like electricity, clean water, healthcare, and employment remains a daily struggle despite years of democratic governance, as citizens increasingly turn to self-help solutions such as solar power systems and private boreholes. Questions are growing about accountability, public trust, and the true impact of governance on daily lives. In this report, our correspondent Yechenu Sasitu examines how the failure of basic social services is shaping public perception of democracy in Nigeria.
The sound of generators has become part of everyday life for the average Nigerian. In homes, shops, and offices, the struggle for electricity, jobs, and affordable living continues to shape how millions experience democracy beyond election seasons. Sisi is an Abuja resident who says the past week has been especially difficult. For 7 straight days, there was no electricity supply in her area.
I work from home most of the time, so I need electricity to stay productive. No lights to pump the water. My food keeps spoiling. Running generator and buying fuel is very expensive, and it has become very difficult to cope, and I'm tired.
Khalid says life without power has affected everything.
We've been suffering this for years and years and years. This is previous generations, current generations, and now it's even worse in our own generation.
Across Nigeria and parts of West Africa, frustrations over poor electricity supply, unemployment, and the rising cost of living are fueling broader conversations about governance and accountability decades after democratic rule returned to many countries in the region. As public services continue to fail many households, more Nigerians are turning to self-help solutions. Across cities and communities, solar installations are becoming increasingly common as families and businesses search for alternatives to unreliable electricity supply. Many households are also drilling private boreholes to secure regular access to water, often at significant personal cost. For many young Nigerians, the challenges go beyond inconvenience. Florence and Victor are both undergraduates at the University of Abuja.
My biggest struggle is trying to survive with the high cost of things. Poor electricity, because that's what I'm even facing.
To actually get maybe a skill that will actually help me financially, because country as we have it is not smiling. It also affects me emotionally.
Economist Ola Oladele says the economic realities may not get better anytime soon.
We've just established that the economic pressure is real and we can't escape that. But the thing is that personal finance is personal. So whilst the economy is doing its thing that you can't control, the question is, what adjustments are you making to your taste and your lifestyle to actually reflect the general direction of the economy?
For governance experts, the implications go beyond economics. Public affairs analyst Kunle Adeni says democracy cannot thrive where citizens consistently lack access to basic social services.
When you look at it, in a situation where people live in communities and they don't have access to quality education, people live in communities where they do not have access to the right healthcare infrastructure. Of course, what does that tell you? It tells you that you are failing in delivering the purpose of democracy, which the people fought for, which the people struggled for.
Kingsley Ngene is barely a year in marriage. His hope is to give his wife a good life.
I know it's their duty to do it for me, but I've learned to do it on my own because over the last 3 years, I've been robbed like twice. They failed me in security, so I've been forced to provide that for myself. And the same thing applies to power and water too. So yes, I do not think I'm enjoying these amenities.
Remember Florence and Victor? They want a system where governance is reflected in practical improvement to daily life, at least to enable them complete their studies.
Because if their focus is on our needs, I don't think we will be suffering. We all want a government that listens, that keeps to their promise and not just say it.
So it's not just about being president or we electing you as the president. Are you doing your duty as the president of Nigeria? Or you being a governor of a particular state? Are you meeting up with the needs?
It is election season in Nigeria, and as usual, promises will be made during campaigns. But analysts say restoring trust in democracy will require more than political promises.
Until governance gets to the point where people do not have to beg for their leaders to construct roads for them to live a good lifestyle, people do not have to beg for them to get good health care, then you can say that democracy is really working. But where these basic amenities are not available, then of course you know that you are walking a thin line of democracy surviving and of course democracy losing its essence.
Across Nigeria and the wider West African region, the debate around democracy is increasingly moving beyond elections and political rhetoric to something more immediate, whether governments can deliver the basic services citizens need to live with dignity.
People power, our power.
Because for many Nigerians, democracy is no longer judged only by the right to vote, but by the ability to switch on a light, confidently open tap for water, access healthcare, find decent work, and build a stable future. For WADR, Yechenu Sasetu in Abuja.
All right, that was a report by our correspondent in Nigeria, Yechenu Sasetu. Mr. Goita, I'll bring you in. We have heard a lot about self-help facilities. We've heard about generators, solars, all help self-services. When citizens increasingly rely on self-help rather than state institutions, what message does this send about our government?
Now, this means that our democracy is collapsing, and then that there is something to fix it. Because no, we should trust that the basic investment should be done by the state, and people need, it's a right. All these services are considered to be right for them. And all our constitutions are completely highlighting these social services as rights for people. Then, if we cannot do it, and then it's now relying, because the first things that have been done in many countries were to do decentralization. And decentralization that was supposed to just to make more investment, make the municipality close to the population to invest, has become a way of decentralizing the corruption and all the problems that were at national level. So instead of just decentralizing, the solutions that were all relevant for investing, we have been decentralizing only problems for people. So this has been one first step. Now, asking people just to create conditions where they don't have opportunities, where it has become very complicated to invest in the economic sectors that are really where the big majority of population are working on. In the Sahel countries, for instance, it's agriculture, it's cattle, it's fishing areas, but also forestry and the like that are related to the agricultural segment. So investment is missing. So how people can create conditions for that? Actually, I'm in the same situation. I have now a solar system. How many people can afford the system? Just will allow them not only to have light for the basic things at home, but also in many cases to use this as a working tool to produce. I'm helping many young people in my street because they had to close everything, their businesses. I had to share part of the electricity that I have so that they can just do the minimum for themselves to get their living. So how many people can afford these kind of things? So it's really clear, actually, that it's a lack of accountability. A lack of accountability vis-a-vis community will lead to these kind of things. So we are considering it as normal. So now people are saying, yes, it's not only the state that should care about the population, but the population should also do something. Yeah, it's true. If you look at sanitation issues, hygiene and sanitation issues, yeah, there is a room for people for education to go beyond what people are doing. But instead of investment, people are paying taxes, people are doing their best to create conditions, is for the governing body just to create also these conditions so that people can get benefits from it and have access to these, and then invest their resources in something else in terms of that. So for me, it's running away from our responsibilities and then creating also conditions that will be very problematic. And it is the reason why also insecurity is coming on board. Many young people consider themselves as being abandoned by the system, and then the way that if they have somewhere where people can give them the minimum resources. Look at the case of Sahel countries, actually, some of the countries, at the very beginning, we are testimony for young people. This was $100. This is about 60,000 CFA was enough to convince young people to get in the armed groups and to kill people, and sometimes their own population, just to access, because that was for some of them the first time to access to this kind of money, because they didn't have any opportunity. So it's a way of also getting rid of responsibilities. We need to consider it. It can be a transitional way of looking at insecurity issues that we have in Sahel countries, for instance, but it cannot be the rule of the game. The rule of the game is that the governing body has to do the basic infrastructure. And then for electricity access, there is room to invest on it. There are conditions that we can create without using one of the big infrastructure in the Sahel countries. We have the way that people are actually using solar system, this same way some countries are doing very well, like Morocco, for instance, that they have been investing, and the money is coming from what the governing body is doing. So we have been repeating things that exist in the continent itself. So that we don't need to go that far to see that it's possible for the government. If resources are well managed, if you look at the budget of these countries and you see what is going on, actually, there is room for investment. And then it's going to be a way of getting rid of responsibilities. This is part of the governance and should be considered as part of the governance.
All right, thank you. Nadine, I'll bring you in now. Obviously, Mr. Goita has spoken a lot about the issues that we are facing. He did speak about the Sahel, but shortly we will take some reports from the Sahel. However, Nadine, before we get into the reports from the Sahel, can democracy remain meaningful if citizens continue lacking essential services? I do know Goita mentioned a collapse of democracy somewhere around the start of his submission. But in your opinion, can democracy be meaningful if these services are not available for citizens?
Thank you very much. I would say the simple answer is no, because democracy is the rule by the people. And how can someone without access to water rule? How can someone who does not have access to education rule? How can someone who does not have access to any of those basic services rule? How is that person empowered to shape the future for himself, for the future of community and the country? So in that case, democracy does not serve. Democracy is only translated as facilitating access to power for some people. And this is actually manifesting itself in the Sahel currently, because we have countries where people are even questioning some of the basic principles or mechanisms of democracy, such as elections, because they think elections are only being too expensive for the country, but they're not yielding the results which they're expecting for it. But then what can countries do to kind of revive the trust in some of these democratic elements, being in elections, being in the institutions, and being in building a strong governance system as a whole? I think there is a debate around power and use of power and services. I think we need to work with countries, and I would say both as citizens and the leaders. In human rights language, we call it rights holders and duty bearers. So when the people have the rights, the leaders have some duties to fulfill. But how are the citizens also using their rights to ensure that the leaders are delivering on what they're supposed to do. So that is one side of the story. On the other side, we also have the leaders and the duties. How are they fulfilling the duties? And I think Mamadou talked about accountability and transparency. We should not only look at the leaders only. We have two sides of the coin here, and it's important to bring into this debate these two sides and how can people from the Sahel and West Africa in general ensure that both citizens are playing their role. We are in a citizen hour here, and how are leaders also playing their role all together for democracy to regain its full meaning and potential for the region. Thank you.
All right, Nadia, you mentioned service delivery and the responsibility of duty bearers, but what practical governance reforms are urgently needed to improve service delivery across the region?
One of the main reforms which is needed to fast-track service delivery is to ensure that decentralization becomes a reality. The leadership getting so close to the people, because people want water, schools, health centers nearby in their neighborhoods or accessible to them. So when the power is not highly centralized, by being brought in at the local level, there is high potential for some of those basic services to be promoted. So that is one. Number two, when I talk about decentralization, I want to kind of put a strong emphasis on fiscal decentralization, which means having the resources of the countries also being invested at local level for the schools to be built, for the health centers to be built. This is not a choice by government, it's a priority. So it's important that the investment choice of the government be guided by the services need, the need in terms of services which are there for the people. So beyond enhancing decentralization and enhancing investment in basic service delivery, I think the third element, which I think is so crucial, is also working closely with the private sector. It is true that the government has a role to play, but it's important to build environments which are investment attractive, so that people can invest in schools, with private schools, they can invest in clinics. But when the private sector does not see potential, and for the private sector to come, you need infrastructure, you need roads, you need electricity, you need water, you need access to internet. So there is also a role for the government to make those communities and those countries very attractive for investors, but also to work closely with the private sector for them to see value in investing in those services. And lastly, I'll go back to the divides, rights holders and duty bearers. Even the rights holders, when those schools are available and the health centers are available, they also have the obligation to contribute and do their best for these institutions to function the way they should. That means whoever is working there should deliver those services the way they should. They need to maintain the infrastructure. They also need to make sure that the people who are supposed to access those services are accessing them without corruption. So these are some of the reforms which I would strongly encourage. I want to just add the last point. When we're talking about improving service delivery, we're talking about improving those services in a region where young people are the majority. So it's also important, as we're working on youth empowerment, to ensure that these young people see value, see opportunities in service delivery. It's important for local authorities and central government to kind of capitalize or leverage on the potential of these young people to create micro enterprises or even big corporate enterprises, which can serve the people in their own neighborhoods and in their own communities. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Nadi. Now let's focus on the Sahel. In Mali, basic social infrastructure plays a vital role in the functioning of democracy and in fostering closer ties between the state and its citizens. But in many parts of the country, insecurity and attacks by armed terrorist groups are undermining this infrastructure and further complicating the operations of public service. Details with our correspondent in Bamako, Aliu Cham by Imo Edit.
For many observers, democracy is not limited to elections or institutions. It also depends on people's access to essential services. In the Sikaso region, this education professional emphasizes that when these infrastructures are no longer accessible, it is the people who bear the direct consequences.
The consequences are severe because attacks on key infrastructure disrupt communication and isolate communities from one another. But beyond that, under international humanitarian law, hospitals are protected facilities and should never be targeted or set on fire. Attacking a hospital destroys already fragile healthcare systems and leaves civilians with nowhere to seek medical care in times of crisis. Where are they supposed to go?
To date, Mali has numerous social infrastructures in major cities, schools, hospitals, public housing, places of worship, markets, and other public facilities. However, in remote areas, this remains a major concern. For this local elected official, the government must make efforts in this regard, as the lack of these basic social infrastructures reduces the government's presence among citizens.
This is terrorism. When they come, they directly target communities and infrastructure. They prevent children from going to school and close down classrooms. Often they even demolish places of worship. We saw what happened in Timbuktu. Health centers are not spread either, leaving vulnerable populations without access to medical care and deepening fear and hopelessness among civilians. Of course, the population will lose hope. Today, thank God, the government is providing the infrastructure.
According to Masire Diop, a security expert, attacks on social infrastructure are now a strategy used by armed groups to permanently weaken the state in certain areas.
These practices didn't just start today, because all of this is part of the strategies of war. What is the point of using, destroying, or sabotaging infrastructure that is primarily intended for civilian use? These are very unfortunate acts, but they are part of war. Now, the government simply needs to be much more vigilant.
In light of this situation, several observers are calling for a stronger state presence and improved security for basic social services in order to preserve public trust in the state and support efforts to restore stability in areas affected by insecurity.
A report by our Bamako correspondent Ali Cham and voiced by Imo Evet. And I'll bring you in here, Mr. Goita. Obviously, you understand the situation in Mali very well because you're from the country. And one of the major problems that the country is faced with is insecurity. Now, to what extent does insecurity weaken democratic governance and public trust?
Yeah, insecurity has been just bringing some layers to the problem that we had. But you have to recognize that before this deepening of insecurity, there were already some challenges related to that. But Mali was considered to be one of the countries where, in terms of some kind of infrastructure related to access to water, but also even to electricity, the rate was not high. But those regions, those zones that we had it was at least, compared to many countries, it was really a bit stable. And also it's one of the countries that have been starting working on solar systems at the very beginning. So insecurity has been adding something very, 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 very strange and very strong to this, to the problem that people are actually facing. But it's also because the way that we have been managing the problem at the very beginning. Because if there was a kind of accountability vis-a-vis, and I'm talking about municipalities, but also at the decentralization level, but also the central state at the very beginning. I'm sure that this should be something that will be a kind of barrier for many other communities that have been joining this insecurity issue actually. Having said that, if there is a strong link between what is going on. It's difficult. Just the correlation is obvious. The issue of the Sahel has been easy for many of these armed groups to come in because these problems have not been addressed by our democratic system, by our governance of resources. And what we have been saying, the equity between just communities and the central government in terms of investment, but also in terms of in social services, of course, but also in other areas like employment. So this is you have to come back to that. Why are we here? Because things are not being managed the way that it should be, and the contribution of the foreign companies in that has been also very instrumental, but also we will support some of the bilateral cooperations and multilateral cooperations. But actually, how can we fix things, in the way is really very complex, because the resources that are supposed to be reorganized, because that is one of the reforms that I will add to what Nadine was saying on the resource governance issue. This is very instrumental in creating conditions for people to access to resources, to create conditions for infrastructure, and not to be too depending, even for our national budget, to the foreign investment coming from bilateral and multilateral cooperation that has been very instrumental also in creating some of these conditions. So for me, insecurity is one of the things that need to be added to our analysis of a problem, but it has not been at the root causes of what is happening actually. It has been exacerbating the situation, but we need to really be honest and saying that it's because that this governance was not working, that this war, also this insecurity came on board in our country, particularly the case of Mali. Sikasso is my region of origin, and I know that this is the region where the agricultural activities are really highly valued, should be highly valued, because this is where also it's running a lot, where production, the majority of production is being done. But if you look at the infrastructure, it's so poor that it's not unbelievable that young people from this region are moving in big majority to go because of a collapse of the cotton sector, the collapse of where young people were making also a lot of money, and the collapse of the minings, because most of the mines are also in that region, in addition to Kai region, and where young people couldn't have access to any of the resources that were taken out of their hands, and that has been creating this. So yeah, there is a strong link actually on that, and we need to go on in terms of reconciling communities, young people who have been involved in this, majority is under also threat, and then have to be educated in the sense of reinvesting in online. So decentralization is one of the things that should be, because they are close to people, and then can be one way of addressing this issue at local level, and before getting to the central, because there is a lack of confidence between many of the governing bodies and the population. Actually, that is very, very difficult to repair in the Sahel case. Actually.
All right, thank you, Mr. Goita. Nadine, before we take the report from Burkina Faso, how difficult is it for states to provide services effectively during prolonged insecurity and conflict?
That is a very interesting question. How difficult is it for them to provide services? But I would also say, are they present in those areas when there is prolonged insecurity? Because this is also an important question here. We're facing cases where the government is present, but services are not provided simply because investment cannot be made in those areas. The private sector is not attracted to go there. Services are not provided because professionals are not attracted to go and live in those areas. Services are not provided because there is no infrastructure which could allow the transport of some basic goods or essential goods, being medical, even needed from education, from the capital cities to those areas, because the roads are not accessible and the risk of attacks on the roads are major. So even when there is presence of government or local government in those areas, access to those basic services is simply very limited because of the reasons I've just mentioned. But we also have cases where there is what we call a governance vacuum, where some of these terrorist groups are offering an alternative, quote unquote, governance mechanism in those areas. So how governments are also, what is being done by the government to also ensure that they gain full legitimacy across the different territories of the country, which is a big question for the Sahel, because the young people we've been talking about, sometimes they do adhere to those terrorist groups because they see in them an alternative governance mechanism. And this is something which really needs to be deconstructed, particularly in the context of the Sahel.
All right, thank you very much, Nadine. Now we head to Burkina Faso, and access to basic social services remains a major concern, especially in the provinces. People sometimes travel for miles to seek medical care, obtain drinking water, or access education. The authorities are tackling the issue head-on, launching a growing number of initiatives to try alleviate the hardships faced by these communities. Our correspondent in Burkina Faso, Martin Kabar, tells us more in this report voiced by Deborah Amuwo.
Razmane Barry is a human rights advocate in northern Burkina Faso. For several years, the civil society activist has observed difficulties in people's access to basic social services.
If you visit the emergency room at the Ouagadougou hospital, they have no choice but to admit everyone. When you go to the clinical support services in Ouagadougou too, it is packed. They have no choice but to admit everyone. They do this because there are no other clinical support service facilities elsewhere. Also, the schools are overwhelmed in Ouagadougou. Due to the situation, they even set up makeshift shelters to house the children because there aren't enough schools elsewhere. You can only find them in Ouagadougou. Aside from Ouagadougou, you have to go to Gorsi or continue on to Yako.
The North is not alone in facing the situation. Nationally, according to figures from Doctors Without Borders, the estimated health coverage rate is less than 65%, and the situation has deteriorated further with the worsening security crisis.
We no longer talk about basic social services because there are no schools, no health centers. The water sources have been destroyed and there are practically no services. Only a few residents remain, and even that is limited to a handful of communities. For example, if you look at the entire commune of Windigui, there is no one there. In Novintun, in the village, there is no one in that commune, for instance. So we can't really talk about basic social services when you look around Wayugwa. There are areas where people can't even go to fetch water anymore because they're afraid of being attacked.
Faced with this reality, the authorities are developing initiatives to alleviate the suffering of the people. In 2025, for example, the Ministry of Health launched mobile clinics distributed across all regions of the country. Health Minister Robert Lucien Kagougou.
The goal is to ensure that even people living in our villages have access to these healthcare services. I would like to mention, for example, vaccination campaigns, malnutrition screening, and prenatal care. We also offer much more specialized services. The mobile clinic enables the screening for precancerous lesions of the cervix and the on-site treatment of these precancerous lesions. The mobile clinic also provides mobile mammographic services.
In another initiative in April, the Ministry of National Solidarity launched the Mobile Social Service, which aims to bring citizens closer to social services through motorized agents.
That was a report by Martin Kaba in Burkina Faso, presented by Deborah Amuwo. Mr. Goita, can you hear me? I have a question for you. So, what are the long-term risks if citizens continue to lose confidence in public institutions, like in the cases that we've seen in most of the countries that we've looked at today?
Yeah, the first is that it's what the deepening of insecurity that we have, because actually, whatever you say, if people are completely out of it, all these infrastructure that we have been talking about, all the social services, the only way is resistance. And resistance against the model that we are shaping, and then it will definitely very problematic for people. Either young people will move or they stay and struggle. And this is that's since most of the doors are closed for them, it may create an internal problems, and the kind of division also. The case of countries like Mali, so creating also conditions for some groups just to try to be separated from the rest of the country. So these are some of the risks that we are actually facing. But anyway, the other point in terms of risk is completely this disconnection can create the collapse of the country. Because why I'm talking about completely collapse of the country? Because the international relationship, the geopolitical arena where we are living actually is highly insecure itself, and then because of what is happening actually between communities and the governing bodies, it may create also a kind of diversion, vis-a-vis what we have at regional level, but also at an international level. So this is something that also creates a big risk for many people. We don't trust the institutions. People don't trust the institutions. People don't trust the people who are just ruling, and it may create a big challenge for the continuity of the model of governance that we are just proposing actually. And if we just talking back about the experience that we have been hearing about Burkina Faso, we all know that even the Sahel country people, the countries are not performing the same way. In some cases, there is still some opportunities that are very relevant, showing that it's possible to do more, but in others, it's really very, very complicated. So it's difficult to compare the countries in that sense, but I think that there is some hope that slowly the resilience of the communities is bringing also some of the governance bodies to more about the kind of investment that are needed, mainly for electricity, but also for mainly investing at the part of that will be also very relevant for that. Burkina is doing very well in that sense, not very well, but it's doing what can be also very relevant for the rest of the process. We don't have the same thing everywhere. So that's something that I really want to mention. So the risks are very high. For completely, there is still a room for investment. There is still room for building more confidence between the governing body and others. But I think that is this room is very small, and we need really to create conditions for strengthening it. Many people, investors in the countries are leaving. I'm talking about private sector that Nadine mentioned also. Many of them are leaving because of the conditions are not fair for investment. Those who are coming are no longer coming, and still there are problems of facing this kind of investment, that the gap that we are actually facing. And it's not understandable for a country like Mali, for instance, where we are a fair producer of gold. And yearly we produce about 72.5 tons of gold, that is sold on the market. That is bringing more than 2,763 over the last 2 years, for instance, of the billions CFA. And our budget is 3,800 billion CFA. This means that we have over 70%, more than 70% of the budget coming from this. But we are getting only 20% of the revenue from this resource. And then showing that there is no room for investment, and we need, foreign investment, foreign support for the budget. That is unbelievable, because the custom officers are bringing more than 9,000 billion CFA in addition to that, and 900,000 billion, and the tax services are bringing more than 1,100 billion CFA. This means that normally, for these three sectors only, we could cover the budget. But it's not the case, actually. Why? If you don't have reform on these and creating conditions that the population know where the resources that are mobilized are going on, there is no way to have a normal state that will function without in this kind of mobility for young people to go in other countries, but also for the private sector to move out of the country. And that's missing all the investment that are possible for this development issue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Goita. Nadine, what role should civil society and citizens themselves play in demanding accountability for better governance?
Thank you. Let me just comment briefly on the report which we have just heard, to say it's very important for all of us to recognize that while we are formulating recommendation, a lot of work is being done into promoting service delivery, including in the case of Burkina Faso. Efforts are being made by the government trying to use and mobilize resources to create conditions for access to service to the people in a number of basic services. But we heard that one of the person who was interviewed said, we can't even talk about service delivery. So while a lot is being done, but the trust is just so broken by the people of the Sahel, including Burkina Faso. UNDP developed a report on the future of governance in the Sahel. And one of the issues which people really recommended us to focus on was public trust. It's because when there is no trust, even the efforts which are being deployed, they're undermined by the people. So I just wanted to flag that as an important ingredient, and then transition towards your question. What is the role of the civil society? I'll start with that. I think the civil society is an important role, which is a role of building a bridge between the people and their leaders. Really, when I'm talking about building a bridge, it could be done in so many ways. One, ensuring that the people and the citizens and communities get access to basic information, which is vital for their personal development, for their contribution to governance, and for peace and stability in the region where they live. But it's also a key responsibility for the civil society to carry the messages and to kind of serve as the voice of the people toward their leaders. And in most cases, we have seen a weakened civil society in a number of countries in the region. And without that bridge, it's looked like the government is isolated, working on their side, and the people are either subscribing to migration or they're on the streets protesting, but there is no interaction between the two. And without close collaboration, as I said earlier, between the right holders and the duty bearers, we can really not talk about either development or good governance in the region. So I think for the civil society, it's important to take that space. It's very challenging for them now, I have to say, because there is a sharp decline of funding for civil society organization. Hence, it's difficult for them to operate, particularly in those remote areas or the areas which are not considered as safe in the context of the Sahel or West Africa at large. So it's also important, I would say, for all the development partners to value collaboration of the civil society. We have seen this as a gap. A lot of development investment is going, and I would say rightly so, to the government, but far less is going into the civil society organization. So it's important now, particularly for development partners and other actors, to value the role of civil society and consider them as partner of choice whenever they're investing in governance or in development. I just want to ask a very last point. Cognizant of the role of the civil society, it's also important to ensure that the civil society remains neutral and faithful to its mandates, that there is no, how can I say, instrumentalization of the civil society, because whenever they're instrumentalized politically, they lose their legitimacy, particularly vis-a-vis the citizen. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Nadine. But before we conclude today's edition, we turn to our fact-checking segment with Francis Boniface. Now, as governments grapple with these challenges, concerns are growing over their impact on stability, public trust, and democratic governance. This week on InfoCheck, we examine how weak service delivery has contributed to insecurity in places like Maiduguri, Nigeria, where years of poor governance and limited opportunities have helped fuel more than a decade of conflict while shaping perceptions of democracy across the region.
Across the Sahel and West Africa, many governments continue to struggle to provide basic services such as education, healthcare, security, jobs, and infrastructure. For many citizens, democracy is increasingly being judged not by elections alone, but by whether government can improve everyday life. As insecurity spreads across parts of the Sahel and its fringes, questions are growing about whether weak service delivery is helping fuel instability, erode public trust, and threaten peaceful coexistence. This This week on InfoCheck, we examine the connection between poor social services, insecurity, and declining confidence in democratic institutions. Few cities in the region illustrate this phenomenon more clearly than Maiduguri, the capital of Nigeria's Borno state, and for years the epicenter of the Boko Haram insurgency. There we spoke with economist and lecturer at the University of Maiduguri, Dr. Jida Mohamed Abdelaziz Ajayi, who says years of insecurity have devastated economic activity, destroyed livelihoods, and pushed many families into hardship.
Naturally, it has negatively affected the economic status, not only Borno, but as you said earlier, the Northeast. Almost every nook and cranny in Borno state has been affected. You know, at a point, only about 5 local governments were not under security threat or security challenge. So most of these local governments, there was virtually no economic activity because of the insurgency. So all programs, all developmental strides or agendas could not be executed, has been disrupted because of the violence. You know, since the local governments are not under government control for quite a while, nothing can happen there. And up till now, I think still in most of these local governments, the challenge is still here.
According to Dr. Ajayi, one of the greatest challenges facing communities affected by conflict is the lack of opportunities, particularly for young people.
You see, this issue in Borno has been there for long, even before the insurgency. As I said, we had this sociological problem a very long time ago, where you have population multiplying and very few going to school for whatever reason. When you go deep into Maiduguri, go and see all the areas, go and see the number of young people with no future plans for them by the authority. You see, the essence of governance is to ensure the stability, sustainability, and development of all societies. Most importantly, the human resource component. But when you have youths that are idle, populations that are growing, you don't have plans for them.
When governments struggle to deliver services and address insecurity, public frustration often extends beyond the executive branch to democratic institutions themselves. Former Senegalese parliamentarian Dr. Ibrahim Sani says many citizens have lost confidence in institutions they believe are failing to hold governments accountable and ensure public resources are used in the public interest.
Parliamentarians tend to obey the executives, if not their parties, the party they belong to. So they do not play their role. I was a parliamentarian about 15 years ago, and what happened at the time was very simple. We had 8 people who had never sat in a school. They couldn't read the law we were voting in. I know, for instance, an interesting example. At that time in Niger, you couldn't be a parliamentarian if you hadn't gone to BEPC. We say that in French. That's probably upper 5th level or upper 6th. I couldn't tell. So it's not the case in most African countries. You can go to parliament, get voted in, and yet you cannot read the laws you're voting on, and so you just vote because people tell you to vote. Simply, your party tells you to vote or the government tells you to vote. Is that democracy? We need a critical mass of informed people on the issues that are being voted on. Do people read and try to understand the issues, what is at stake? I doubt that, I'm afraid. There's a lot of laziness around. I can testify to that. And people just don't look into those.
Experts argue that rebuilding trust requires more than promises or political rhetoric. Citizens need to see visible improvements in their daily lives alongside transparency and accountability in the management of public resources. Dr. Ajayi believes that restoring confidence begins with ensuring that citizens are informed about what governments are doing and are able to see measurable results.
And in the interest of transparency and accountability, people need to know what has been done so far to assuage the fears of the people. I live in Maiduguri. I don't know anything about it. What more about somebody who is living on the outskirts of Maiduguri? So there should be information what is being done, and people need to see tangible things being done. I'm not saying the government is not doing anything, but I think they need to do more can be done.
The experiences of communities across the Sahel suggest that security, development, and democracy are deeply interconnected. Where citizens lack access to education, jobs, healthcare, infrastructure, and security, frustration can grow, trust in institutions can decline, and social cohesion can weaken. The result can be a cycle in which weak services contribute to insecurity. Insecurity undermines development, and both erode confidence in democratic governance. While elections remain an important pillar of democracy, many experts argue that democratic legitimacy ultimately depends on whether government can deliver meaningful improvements in people's daily lives. I am Francis Boniface, and this has been InfoCheck.
All right. right, thank you, Francis Boniface, for the Info Check segment. Now, today's discussion reminds us that democracy is not just measured by election or political transitions. For many citizens, democracy is also about whether governments can provide healthcare, education, electricity, water, security, and dignity. But before we leave, I have a final question for my guest today. I'll start with you, Nadine. In 30 seconds, what is the single most important step governments must take today to ensure they restore public trust?
Commit to service. If I can elaborate.
Yes, you can elaborate in under a minute.
Okay, thanks. So just ensuring that their role is primarily to serve their people and ensure that the development needs are met. I think that is the primary step. And if I can add to that, I also want to remind us, since we are in the citizen hour, that service delivery has two sides. There is the leadership and the government on the other side. But the people delivering services in those institutions have another role to play. So let's ensure that we are all playing our part so that service delivery can become an accelerator of development and governance in the region.
All right, thank you very much, Nadine. And Mr. Goita, what step must governments take today to ensure that they restore public trust in under a minute? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would join what Nadine said, but in adding that, we need really to implement what is really the commitment for the state. First, that there is a lot of reform that need to be done, but the problem is how can we implement? And then rebuild this trust means that we are really investing in social services and allowing people to access to these services. So we don't have any other option. We do that or we go the other way.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Goita. Across West Africa and the Sahel, the demand today is not simply for representation, but for governance that delivers to the expectations of its citizens. My sincere thanks to my guest today, Nadine Umtoni Rugwe, team leader and advisor on governance and peace building for UNDP West and Central Africa. Thank you very much, Nadine. And we also have Mamadou Goita, Executive Director of the Institute for Research and Promotion of Alternatives for Development. Thank you very much, Mr. Goita. I would also like to thank our correspondents and contributors across the region for their contributions to today's program. And a special thanks to Francis Boniface for presenting today's InfoCheck segment. Maudo Juve and Mustafa Sek have been our technicians for today. Thank you for listening to Citizens Are, the net edition on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM. I am Veronique Njai. Stay informed, stay engaged.
Citizens Are is evolving as the WADR's partnership with NET continues. This April, your NET Democracy and Governance program is going to the Sahel. We will focus on Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and other West African countries, including Benin, Togo, Nigeria, and the Gambia. Bolder conversations, real voices, inclusive discussions. Let's talk democracy. Let's talk governance. Let's talk your truth. Citizens Are Season 2 in partnership with the National Endowment for Democracy, NET, on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM, Dakar.